Hey guys, it's Miss Kellogg again with your 5.09 read-along, American Scene Painting and Regionalism. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, American artists depicted realistic scenes of contemporary life. Regionalist painters in the Midwest showed unembellished scenes of rural life, and artists created stark images of urban isolation. Photographers funded by government programs fanned out across the country to document the struggles of the poor. Here's your student guide to use. Use your student guide as we read along. The Great Depression hits America. The New York stock market crashed in 1929, triggered a series of tumultuous events, and soon engulfed the entire country. Businesses went bankrupt, factories shut their doors, banks failed, and people lost their jobs and their life savings, and often their homes or farms. By 1933, 1/4 of the American population was out of work. Inaugurated president at that same year, Franklin Delano Roosevelt instituted a sweeping series of measures known as the New Deal, designed to stimulate the economy and create jobs. Just like the rest of the nation, artists faced hard times and unemployment during the Depression. Painters, sculptors, and photographers all received their own government-funded programs to get them working again. Under one Treasury Department initiative, some 1,300 murals and 300 sculptures were commissioned for display in post offices, courthouses, and other federal buildings. The Farm Security Administration, FSA, meanwhile, hired photographers to chronicle the plight of dispossessed farmers, sharecroppers, and migrant workers throughout rural America. American Scene Painting. Some New Deal art programs encouraged painters to produce works that features distinctively American subjects, from landscapes to the lives of the people. These artists painted in a realist style that either recorded the contemporary struggles of Americans during the Depression or recalled heroic traditions from earlier times to encourage public optimism towards the future. Art historians give this broad movement the label of American scene painting, and within it, some artists branched into regional groups with distinctive styles. American scene painters rebelled against the European modernist styles that had been introduced in the country in the 1913 Armory exhibition in New York City. Accustomed to rational life like American scene painters were shocked by the abstract and non-representational works of Vincent van Gogh, Paul Cézanne, Edvard Munch, Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso, and Wallace Kandinsky. Explore the Armory exhibition on the next page. So this is what they were shocked by. These kind of artworks that were here. Grant Wood and Regionalism. A native to Iowa, Grant Wood was born in 1891. Although he briefly attended art school in Minneapolis and later took classes at the Art Institute of Chicago, Wood was largely a self-taught artist. On several trips to Europe in the 1920s, he explored the works of Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, but he was most inspired by the highly detailed style of Northern Gothic and Renaissance painters. I realized that all the really good ideas had ever come to me while I was milking a cow, so I went back to Iowa, Wood said. When he returned, he developed a vision for regionalists, believed artists should be produced clearly understandable paintings, an unequivocal rejection of the abstract expressive styles that Wood had seen in Europe. Rejecting urbanization and industrialization, Wood and his fellow regionalists depicted rural Midwestern values and a Puritan work ethic in an honest, uncomplicated fashion. The portraits of 15th century Flemish artist Hans Muren inspired Grant Wood after viewing Memling's portraits and those of other Northern Gothic and Renaissance painters. Wood began painting portraits with a great detail and texture, carefully posing his subjects with incorporated props and setting that tell the sitter. Like the figure of Memling's portraits, Wood's figures have rigid frontal and three-quarter poses and confront the viewer with a tightly packed composition. What similarities do you see between Memling's portrait and the American Gothic? Consider the people's expression, the depiction and detailed texture, the color palette, the props, the setting, and the role of the hands. We're going to explore American Gothic on this page. Some detailed photos. Illustrations of Midwestern life. How do you interpret the painting? What do you think Wood wanted to express? Have you seen some versions of American Gothic? This painting has become such an American icon, and other artists have created parodies substituting the peoples or animals of the farmer and the daughter. Some parodies depict movie stars, presidents and their wives, or even Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy. Pay attention to images in newspapers and magazines, TV commercials, and posters. Maybe you'll see one based on American Gothic. An American Gothic Grant Wood depicts a farmer and his daughter standing in front of a pristine, almost church-like white farmhouse. A red barn is slightly seen in the right in the background. Here is the farmer and his daughter in the actual house. During Wood's trips to Europe, he saw beautiful stained glass windows in Gothic churches and cathedrals. These pointed arches and windows inspired Gothic Revival style in architecture in the United States. The window in American Gothic is the Gothic Revival style, and it's also inspired the painting in the title. Wood used repetition to create unity in the painting. The shape and the lines of the Gothic windows are also repeated in the pitchfork and the stitching of the farmer's overalls, in the farmer's face, and in the lines of the roof. Wood used meticulous brushstrokes to capture intricate details, which can be seen in deep wrinkles in the farmer's face and the coiled hair that has sprung loose from his daughter's bun, and the tiny patterns that cover the apron and the curtains in the background. The farmer's weathered, aged hand as it firmly grips the pitchfork plays a prominent role in American Gothic. It anchors the composition and conveys a sense of rural work ethics. Dorothea Lang was born in Hoboken, New Jersey in 1895 and grew up in New York City. Defying her mother's wishes, she became a teacher. Lang pursued a career in photography. She began as an apprentice to the famous portrait photographer Arnold Jean, and then studied with Clarence White at Columbia University. In the 1920s, Lang relocated to San Francisco and became a successful portrait photographer. As the Great Depression swept across the country, Lang believed she could use her skills to record the plight of those in need. In 1935, she took a job with the Farm Security Administration, documenting the living conditions of poverty-stricken migrant workers. Her compositions telling of the struggling Americans contrast sharply with the optimistic images of Wood and Regionalists. I love this photograph. It's my favorite. Lang's iconic photograph of this one most widely recognized images of the Great Depression, Migrant Mother, Nipomo Valley, documents the pain and suffering of 32-year-old Florence Thompson, a widowed mother of 7, seeking work as a pea picker camp in California. Due to freezing weather conditions, there were no jobs to be had. Lang's photo captures Thompson with 3 of her children, all taking refuge in a tattered lean-to. While at the camp, Lang discovered that most of the migrant workers were on the brink of starvation. Several days later, her photograph was published in a San Francisco newspaper, prompting the government to rush food and supplies to the camp. Lang's incredible photographic legacy is celebrated in museums and textbooks. Yet, she personally did not consider photography an art form and viewed herself as a documentarian, not an artist. What do you think? Do you believe Lang's photographs are artistic representations or historical records? Or can they be both? According to Lang, she took only a handful of photographs of Thompson and her children. Initially, she treated her subjects with defiance and shot them from a distance. With each successive click of the shutter, however, she stepped closer and closer. In a final close-cropped image, the older children turn away from Lang and huddle around their mother while the baby sleeps in her lap. Thompson stares pensively into the vacant space, lightly touching her hand into her chin. Lang later maintained that she did not pose any of her figures. Dorothea Lang took several images of the migrant mother moving closer, but tried different angles and compositions before getting that iconic image. The Madonna-like figure of Thompson is surrounded by her children, who form a triangle around their mother. The other children stand slightly behind her in the shadow, while Thompson and the baby are bathed in light. The close-up images of Thompson captures a complex range of emotions, expressing her furrowed brow and distant gaze, conveying worry, vulnerability, and fear. What emotions do you see in this image? Lang chose to publish this image because it emphasized the people and not the setting of the close-cropped image, framed by a simple dark background, brings a sense of immediacy to the figures. Lang wanted the people to see the depression affected children as well as adults. In this image, she captures the devastating effects of poverty. The children appeared tired, dirty, and wearing ragged clothes. Edward Hopper, independent American scene painter. Born in 1882, Edward Hopper grew up in a middle-class family in Nyack, New York. To appease his parents, he studied that he learned a marketable skill. Hopper took courses in commercial illustration. A little later, however, he transferred to the prestigious University, New York Institute of Art and Design, where for 6 years he learned painting under Robert Henry, who depicted gritty scenes of urban life. Henry was a member of the Aswan School of Painters, and Hopper drew inspiration from the realist style, but rather than paint images of specific historic events and people, he chose to capture the broad implications of loneliness and isolation in modern American society. Hopper was a notable independent within American scene painting movement, avoiding association with those smaller groups such as regionalists. In Nighthawks, Hopper demonstrated a keen ability to capture the gist of modern city. He believed a carefully staged composition with saturated colors created a scene that brilliantly illustrates how human beings can appear as well as feel. Isolated in the midst of urban environment, 4 figures occupy a diner late at night. The streets outside are empty. The man on the left sits alone in solitude, while the couple appear not to interact. Harsh fluorescent lights beam down from above. Hopper was known for making his paintings that echoed national mindset. He began working on Nighthawks in 1942, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The gloomy mood, stillness, and alienated figures mirrored his personal interpretation of American life in the 1940s. Hopper painted in representational style, yet he did not strive for meticulous detail. He simplified and smoothed figures and objects with more basic shapes to enhance the mood and create solid-looking forms. The reduction of detail also makes the diner appear as if it could be nearly any city, giving the painting a timeless quality. Hopper used dramatic changes in the dark and light values to give his figures a sense of depth. Hopper employed strong lighting to create mood. Fluorescent lighting and newly developed around his time, Hopper made this painting reflects the lemon-colored walls and the cast harsh lights of the figures. Lights cascade throughout the massive plate glass and creates an eerie glow of the sidewalks outside. Hopper separated the viewer from the figures inside the wall with no door to enter. The viewer fears through the glass, aware that there's a sense of isolation inside, but not knowing who the people are. What are they thinking or their circumstances? The customers appear unaware of the remote from the viewer, although Hopper denied that he intentionally used symbols of isolation. In Nighthawks, Hopper used the architecture of the diner and the surrounding buildings to anchor the asymmetric composition, while light and color created the mood. The geometric shapes and the horizontal, vertical, and diagonal lines all work together to create an organized and balanced whole. The strong angles and deep shadows also add to the drama. Here are the vertical, horizontal, and diagonal. All right, that's all for 5.09.